503, we'll call this in order.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Wyland?
Here.
Hettinger? Dirk Sluby? Here. Haig is excused. Minell?
Here.
Art is excused.
On the agenda is the Human Resource Committee meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from August 7th.
Motion.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is public comments. Did you get any? It's usually very crowded in here. I didn't get any. Keith, you guys get any emails?
Oh,
Right, on to new business. We have the draft report from PAA.
So Dave Tebow from Public Administration Associates is able to join us via Zoom here tonight. Dave, I don't know if you would like to kind of lead the outset of this discussion, just kind of review the report draft at this point and maybe go through the process and so forth, however you'd like to handle that.
I'm wondering how extensive, I mean, have people been able to read the report? Should we go right to questions? Are there specific items you want me to cover more than others? Should we go through the whole thing? Any thoughts?
We just got the report tonight. No one has had a chance to review it, so if you could provide a summary, that would be
There's a
fantastic.
draft that was in the packet.
That you just sent out Friday. Chance to review it. Yeah, if you could just provide a high-level summary, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. Initially in the memo, I just laid out a little bit as a reminder, our last memo. Can everybody hear me all right?
yeah, you're good.
Okay. That we provided in July, how we chose peer communities, or we worked with the community to choose peer communities for the wage survey. And there was 11 municipalities that responded. Those are listed there. We did meet with employees to discuss a position description questionnaire. We interviewed employees to get more feedback. We're working with employees to update job descriptions to match current responsibilities. And at that point, we were back data from our wage survey, and we said we would bring some data to Keith by August, and which we did, and a final report by September, which would be, this is kind of a foundation for a final report. So basically in our review, we found that you have a pretty good job classification and compensation system in place. And it may not be being followed as closely as expected, but you have a really good foundation there to build on. Some of the key recommendations that in chapter 5, we thought there was a lot of opportunities to build on however you're utilizing your plan right now, to pick and choose the basic commitments that you've made to job classifications and salary increases, and maybe make that the foundation of that chapter 5. Often in that chapter 5, we notice there's quite a few exact dates that you need to meet. There's some exact performances of responsibilities that need to be met. Maybe those could be broadened to allow for more administrative flexibility, but that you could pick and choose based on the commitment that you'd like to move forward with. It's a good foundation plan. It's based on pay for performance. It's based on a current range of 87.5% of median to 120% of median, which makes sense. We agreed with that. So that's something that I think should be maintained. I guess that's, the point of all of this is that we think you should build on these foundation elements. We think, like saying number 3 there, it wasn't really clear to us how systematically you were evaluating employees. We thought it would be good to, if you're going to base or have merit adjustments or salary adjustments, to try to make sure that the compensation is being analyzed and the performance is being evaluated consistently across all employees across the entire system. So that's something we thought you should look at. How good are the tools that you're working with? There's all kinds of options, as you're probably aware, and maybe we thought maybe some supervisors were using different approaches. Maybe you would try to make that more consistent across supervisors. Some basic goal setting could be one approach, or some communities do some very strict performance measurements standards. We can offer you some tools, but usually what we find is there's a very unique, usually each community wants to have their own unique approach. And the administrator and the supervisors could work together to figure out what would work best for you moving forward. Number 4 there. The other element of this is job classifications, not just external. You want to have not only external equity with other peer communities, but internal equity. So that's based on job classifications, a review of job descriptions. Again, within your current compensation policy, you talk about that, the importance of that. Again, maybe some of that could be simplified just to make the commitment to classification, the commitment to changing classifications when necessary, and making that process part of your every year employee evaluation process. We mentioned there, if you go on to the next page or follow through on 4, in our analysis of job descriptions, how we analyze the percentages, the points that we give to each. We analyzed your job classifications. There was a few changes that we were recommending, which we'll talk about in a second. Continuing on, I think there was only one thing that's interesting about when you're comparing peer communities, like we selected, if you remember, and some of you were probably involved in that process, you set aside certain factors like increase in population, equalized value, land area, roads of miles, things like that. But what we found is when you get to that 10,000 to 20,000 population range, that you can get some really good comparables between positions. Like, for example, things are starting to be delegated more clearly in that size of a community, and you can make some really good usually good comparable positions, like say the finance director will be doing something that a finance director would be doing in another community. A director of community development would be doing something similar. An administrator would be doing something similar. Like sometimes when you compare very small communities, they haven't made that like transition yet. So it's not as easy to compare because say an administrator may be taking on finance director responsibilities or community development director responsibilities. But now at this level, we got some good comps. We're happy with the comps that we got for the most part. I just made a few comments there. There was a couple, maybe you move down further there, a couple where we didn't get quite as good a comps as we would like because we were doing a wage survey for a deputy clerk position. Actually, the deputy clerk was not quite something that fit with the AP payroll HR assistant position, that newly developed one that you're working on. But then we took that deputy village clerk data and kind of upped it a little bit because it would have more job responsibilities. Your position will have more job responsibilities than a typical deputy clerk. So we felt that range of comparison was accurate. The other was the director of technology. We were impressed by the amount of work and responsibility that the director of technology had. Some communities don't even have a director of technology, as I mentioned in our report. But we were able to get 6 other communities that did. So we had some pretty good comps, but a lot of times there will be a separation between a GIS person and a finance director, for example. I'm sorry, a GIS and a technology director. So if you have a person who's doing both GIS and kind of handling technology, that's really a bonus for you. Also, a lot of communities do contract for a technology director, but then you'd be contracting for both a GIS person, or you could be contracting for a GIS and a technology director privately, for example. So the fact that you have both within Weston, well, we thought was something that was very helpful for the community. And then I think the key findings were exhibited in Exhibit A. Within that memo, then I did have exhibits pointed out as to how we handled some of the different processes, like which you can look at. There was a questionnaire. There was a I don't know if you want to go to that real quick. Kind of we skipped over. This is an example of the questionnaire we used for our when we were working with the employees, and what we used to analyze responsibilities. I think keep going then. I wanted to give an example of Exhibit B would have been an example of a wage survey response. This is from Ashwaubenon. This is what our wage survey looked like. This is what a typical response that we would get, that we would utilize to analyze the different positions. That's Exhibit B. Exhibit C was an example of, we also did a survey of benefits. This is an example of just one response from Village of Fox Crossing. So we did get a good sampling of benefit responses as well. So when we do have the final report, we'll put all this data together so that you can analyze everything and see what we've done. Exhibit D is an example of what we did for each position. This is the administrator, for example, the administrator responses. It shows the different communities. It shows the and the kind of the computation that we utilized to get to the median. We call midpoint. In your compensation policy, it's called market or control point. For us, it's median or midpoint. So this is how we got to that within each position. And again, I can share for each position when I send the final report. This is giving you an example of the data that we utilized. And then finally, Exhibit E, which I guess is kind of what we were, it kind of shows the final computations. Well, I guess maybe before we go on with that, were there any questions so far with the process, or? Okay, so within this Appendix E then, hold on, my neighbor is doing something weird out here.
Images of
I
Zoom.
apologize. The recommendations kind of stem from this final Appendix E. Now, one of your early pay matrices, I think it was whoever did your study previously, had suggested the 5-step process or 6-step process to midpoint or market or control, whatever you want to call it, and then a merit area from that to the top of the pay range. So it would start at 87.5% and go to 120%. So this is something that we like, is a exact step process to get to midpoint, because if you have quality employees, if you have employees that you've hired and they're doing the job, they're learning the job, they're growing into the job, you want to get them to that market rate as quickly as possible. I saw one of your past matrices actually talked about a 3-year process. You know, we usually say 3 to 5 years. You want to get your good people, or people you've hired that are doing a good job, to that market rate, so they're not falling behind. So we're recommending that 5-step process to median or midpoint or control or market, and then thereafter a merit increase based on performance evaluation for those who are high performing. Now, you have some very clear definitions in your policy about how you should look at people or define people pre-midpoint, how you're defining people who are at midpoint, and how you are defining people who are kind of beyond that or in the merit range. So I think it's important to follow that. And as an example, your director of public works, if you look at his wage, his current wage, so he is currently would be at 93% of the midpoint, and he's been there 12 years. If you were so I just if you read that one definition that's in your policy, I thought it was very interesting, and it probably doesn't apply to your director of public works. It says those who are in in the range before midpoint are those who are continuing to learn job responsibilities while meeting performance standards, those who are fully trained but perform at a level that is less than proficient, or have not acquired sufficient time in the job to warrant pay at the midpoint level. So that's how your policy defines a pre-midpoint or a pre-market rate employee. But in fact, does that define your director of public works based on our research? No, it doesn't. This is a higher performing individual who should at least be at market or in the merit range. Another one that you could apply the logic to is, say, your director of finance and director of planning and development. They've both been there 15 and 19 years. Now, according to our data, they're right at the market midpoint. But in fact, how are they performing? Are they just performing, at that rate, or should they be in a merit, a little bit higher in the range because of the amount of time and experience that they bring to the job? I mean, that's a question that you would have to answer, but our thought would be, well, they should be, slightly above the midpoint based on the number of years and the quality of work that they're bringing to that position. The director of technology, even though, despite what we said earlier about kind of the, job, what he brings to the job, he's at 92% of midpoint. And he's got 18 years of experience. So realistically, I mean, he should be probably in the merit range if he's doing the job that we thought in our research. If he's fulfilling his job responsibilities adequately, he should be, be at midpoint or well beyond. We did move your director of parks and recreation. That position was classified as an M, actually. We weren't quite sure why it was classified so low, because that person, their job responsibilities are fairly great. They have employees that they supervise. And so we thought they should fall, that position based on job description should be in the O category. And in fact, that fits in the wage range that we found for the parks and rec directors generally. But there's another person who's been in the position 22 years, but is at 92% of midpoint. These are all just comments, again, based on what we found and what we're proposing. The deputy director of public works and the utility superintendent are both newer employees. So they've both been there approximately 3 years. So it makes sense that they might be below midpoint, but yet there's an example of how you would like to move people up. Make sure they're moving up gradually to get to that midpoint so that they're not falling further and further behind that market rate. The village clerk was well situated. The deputy director of finance, we moved to a K classification just because in the current job responsibilities seem to be not as responsible as an L, but it could, based on what we found or what we heard from Keith, that the attempt was to move those job responsibilities up so that they're fulfilling some of the finance director role. Excuse me. Then that would make sense. You could reclassify if that became the case. The new position, the AP payroll HR assistant person, you had reclassified that and moved that to a K. Earlier this year, we felt like that was an appropriate move. and also the range for that person seemed to be accurate. So those are just some of the comments and some of the data, key data that we found based on our review of the external peers and also the internal classification. Now this Exhibit E is an example of, whether you call it a matrix, a grid, or whatever. It's something that also needs to move on an annual basis. Not if you're able to, and also, we realize there are budget constraints, but this needs, in order to maintain or be consistent and to grow with inflation, this grid needs to move a certain amount every year. Some communities choose CPI. Obviously, it's difficult to go with the community price index every year, depending on the amount of inflation. But if you're going to remain consistent and your rates are going to remain comparable with your peers, then it needs to move annually, because other communities are moving their rates annually. These are 2023 rates, keep in mind. So if possible, there should be some adjustment for 2024, not only to move people within the ranges, but also to move the entire grid so that it's keeping pace with some level of inflation. I hope I didn't confuse everybody, but maybe there's some questions at this point.
So maybe could I clarify a couple things perhaps that based on some other information that I put together today before the meeting.
Okay.
Just to be sure, just to be clear, Exhibit E is PAA's recommendation on how the pay plan is structured right now. It's not making any recommendations on where somebody moves. He's talked about the philosophy of how they move. And I know we've talked about this in our meetings as well, that as we make a adjustment in the pay plan, and if we change the midpoint, but we don't change somebody's salary or compensation that goes along with that, under the old or previous, I should say, existing pay plan, they're above market rate. When we adjust that midpoint, they fall either closer to it or farther below it. So that would be the thing that I know Dave has addressed in his comments. Now, this spreadsheet I put in front of you, I say it's PAA recommended compensation. That's a misnomer, really. All I was trying to show is what it would take to get people to midpoint on their recommendations based on where they are now relative to that midpoint. And just on those positions that were reviewed here, that equates to $45,000 overall. Just
To
to
clarify the comp ratio,
pardon?
you have comp ratio.
That would
listed
be
here.
that would be the wage or compensation relative to the revised midpoint or market rate.
So if I'm looking at the current 2023 compensation, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this spreadsheet.
Yep.
If you're looking at the Director of Public Works, sorry, Mike,
That's fine.
we were identified in the document, so with that, it was 94% of midpoint.
Under the new recommended base, or I should say the new recommended market point.
Right, so I'm trying to understand this spreadsheet relative to what the words on the summary report was, because we have Mike at 102.3% comp ratio, which is, I'm assuming, the same definition of percentage from midpoint.
Under a previous
Under the
pay plan.
2023.
2020 pay plan.
Well, it says
We
current
didn't-
2023 compensation.
Okay, that's their compensation, but the pay plan above grade L did not change. So if we look, we could go beyond here and look at what those are.
I just want to clarify.
But it is under whatever was approved by the board, which was still using the 2019 compensation plan.
So this 102.3 was based off of the 2019 comp.
Correct.
Okay. So when we're
look at-
getting the recommendation, moving the new midpoint,
All I'm doing is, I'm saying, I'm showing what they're recommending as a new midpoint.
I know, I'm trying to understand it.
Yep.
So what the summary report said is Mike's compensation relative to the new midpoint would be at 94%?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm looking at PAA recommended comp,
that,
he's listed at 100%.
yeah, that's,
That's
again,
what
I'm showing the dollars it would take to get him to a comp ratio of 100 minimum, okay?
Okay, so.
That's not their recommendation. That's just me showing
showing the
what the
100.
magnitude of that is.
Okay.
And
so
that's not even my recommendation at this point.
Yeah, I thought.
Okay,
I just
now,
wanted
now
to-
we're Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the-
twenty twenty-three was messing me up here on this 102.3%.
Right, I was just trying to give us some sense of what that adjustment would mean to get people to midpoint even. Not that, maybe
And
not,
that's based on these recommendations,
Based
not
on
based on what was proposed back in March.
right, PAA's recommendation is just to move
'Cause yeah, there's
our,
big jumps.
these grades, T and below essentially to what they are for these positions. So I think there's some overlap as we get down to L and K and, we may just want to place them differently so we don't have multiple grades in there and just use the ones we have. So that's some detail I think we still gotta revisit after this is done.
I just wanted to clarify.
So I'm sorry if, I didn't want to put information out there to confuse, and this was stuff that I really didn't have able,
Nope, that
do
makes sense.
things
No,
with
just
in
wanted to
advance.
clarify that.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
I guess if I may, just if you look at, and I know Keith did some work with some other documents, but if you look at that exhibit E, if the Director of Public Works, his 2023 rate is 4816. So if you look over at the step 3 and step 4, so right now he is in between step 3 and step 4 in what would be your current plan. So what Keith is probably saying is that if eventually you want to try and get that person up to 5126 as soon as possible, excuse me. So how you do that, I guess, is up to budget opportunities, employee evaluations, et cetera, because you have a number of people that are in that step 3 or step 4 range that you're trying to get up to the market as soon as possible, I would say, because they're such long-term and I think respected and quality employees.
I think that, looking
Before you
at,
speak, can I just ask a question? Sure. Since I've been on this committee, I have always saw that anytime we talk about wages, that's in private session, and this is not in private session. Is that a problem?
Well, this is a document that's used for a pay plan that's gonna be published. It's gonna be public document, so I didn't see the, we're not necessarily talking about performance, we're talking about what the pay ranges are for these positions.
it is public information.
Yeah.
Our wages are public information as well?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, just, we've always
The
gone to
Daily
private
Herald comes
session
and
with
grabs
it.
all of our
Yeah.
information all the time.
I'd say
I just-
unless you said, hey, we need to talk about this person having this exact salary. I guess, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to ask.
As a person who's highlighted up there, I don't care.
Well, still, we have to be respectful,
I
but
just
yeah.
wanted to make sure we were following what I was used to on this committee, and I don't know all those specific role, so thank you for clarifying.
Because we're talking about positions, not people.
Correct.
And then,
Yeah.
that's a pay scale for positions, not for people. Just
Right,
happens
exactly.
here.
Just
Unfortunately,
haven't
this
know
is-
who the people
this is
in
my
the
fault.
positions are, I guess.
But yeah, this is all public information. So even they can pull individual salary information, it's public record, it's public. So it's a little different than the private sector.
Yes.
Yeah, and I heard Gannett's pulling all of our public salary information now,
Thank
so
you.
they do it once a year.
And if you get the business news, they'll publish the superintendent wages and stuff like
Oh,
that.
Okay, so a couple other things, I guess.
Oh, no, I was just saying, so my understanding from what we're looking at is first, before we would even act on anything here, we'd have to actually approve a new adjustment for these positions.
Well, this is.
Yeah, well, really all
So
we're,
this is the preliminary, okay,
right, this is,
just, we're not there yet.
I think we need, I would say we need to do some massaging, if you will, of, you know, again, we have, if you go down farther in these attachments, and I know they're kind of in the, maybe go down to the last one, Michael. Last attachment, which would be the, how our pay plan would look if we adopted. So that was the one that we looked at in March. So that was approved for those positions lower than L. And then this would be the modified pay plan based on the PAA preliminary findings here. So as you go down, you can see, okay, the administrator was a midpoint of 127, 256, which is that number you'll see in the attachment that Dave had, I think was attachment B. And there'll be a similar workbook or worksheet for every position that was reviewed. So he shows what the midpoint is based on the comparative data that he obtained. Then you go down through the different positions and you'll see that that midpoint then is the one that was recommended for each of those positions. As the note says, the Director of Technology and Director of Parks and Recreation were recommended to move to grade O. Dave covered that in his summary. With respect to Deputy Director of Public Works and Utilities Superintendent, I guess we might argue from our point of view that those positions should just as well be on the same grade. They're $1 apart, and I guess right now they're kind of in a similar spot. They have similar responsibilities. Current utility superintendent has a PE. I mean, we can talk about some of that detail at another time, but there may not really be any rationale to keep them separate. It's something we can follow up with Dave on as well. Down to the next page there. That would be I listed it as L1. The actual grade L there is the one that we had approved. This L1 would be the midpoint as PAA has recommended in this and in their comps right now. So actually our clerk would drop a little bit on the compensation ratio if this is adopted from, I think, 94% to something around 92, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe 97 to 94, something like that. And then Deputy Director of Finance, and I don't know that there's really any reason to adopt a different wage range for say a K1 versus a K in this case. So those are just maybe some details that need to be massaged a little bit. I don't think they're significant in terms of the way the plan is structured. So
This is a full report review.
it's a question for Dave. He was prepared to have this available for the board meeting in September here, correct?
Well, I guess, well, this is one option, I guess, to present to the board in terms of our findings. Is that what you mean, or?
Well, I think that's the question the chair has. Do you want, do we see a reason or a need for making any substantial change here? Based on what you've heard here tonight or seen?
I mean, personally, the only thing that I would imagine being changed from our perspective would be gathering as much, a little bit more information together, putting it all and packaging it in a final report for your acceptance, in terms of if you would like that. I'm not sure when your meeting is, if I can get that done for September. I wanted to get the wage range information because I know that's important, you know, for budget purposes and analysis purposes. Or if there's something else you feel that you need in order to make a decision on the wage ranges. I don't know.
Well, I just, I think heard a comment here. Kind of like along the lines of what I had talked to you about originally, less is more. Keep it short, keep it brief, I guess. Although again, whether or not people want to have the detail in the background that they can refer to at some point. So I think that's what he was, that's what we had talked about later. So I don't want to confuse the issue.
It's a lot of data.
Yes.
And I'm thankful that you provided that summary. I thought that was very helpful in presenting something of the boards that I'm used to. They would have glossy eyes looking at all of this versus like an SR summary, background, assessment, and recommendations. So that the board has succinct data as to this is what we found and these are the recommendations. With all the details of backup if they want to get into those details. That's always nice to have too. I don't know how your board, I've never been.
Well,
To a board here,
you
so.
have one current board member, you have a former board member, two current board members, one online and one here.
I think there should be direct, like, as you're presenting it, there should be. Cause you get lost in this
Yeah.
so easily,
Very easy.
very easily. I think there should be an outline of what's it, you know, what was found, what the recommendations are, and how to get it there.
Summary on that, came up with how we compare to other villages.
So I think that would then mean to probably leave the questionnaire out. That just adds a little fluff. Get a sample of a wage like you have in here. I don't know that maybe there needs to be much of a change in the whole product. I think Exhibit E really is the one that tells the story. But I guess if we would want to, the committee thinks it's logical and to just kind of combine those.
Or I mean, our memo as presented, is that simple enough or is it too complicated?
For the board, with the, I know we're looking at the handbook tonight yet about chapter 5 because of some of the definitions. Are you hoping to get that resolved tonight so that we go to the board? Those recommendations that are made, you have answers for the board?
I don't know that we'd be making the recommendations until, say, the next meeting, but As far as you mean compensation adjustments for twenty
No, the
twenty-four?
definitions of your handbook,
Oh, well,
chapter 5.
quite honestly, I viewed that as something that would have been done concurrently with my successor. And then if we had been here at the same time, it would have been maybe a good project for one or the other. to Get ready, but that's not gonna happen, so we can at least make some, I guess, commentary on what we should change. Right now, we're trying to follow what's in there. In principle, I think we're doing that.
I think from my perspective, reading your current policy, it recommends every so often reviewing wages and making sure that they're competitive. So in fact, what you've done by contracting with PAA is you're following your compensation policy and saying, okay, check out these wages for us and help us understand if we, from your perspective, where are we in terms of our peer communities? And then that's what we've done and responded with, this is what we believe are the adjustments that need to be made. And so that's, I guess, our basic presentation, or our basic, that would be what you would, in my mind, would come to the board from PAA, is the wage range data, the new wage range data that we've done. And if if you feel like it's acceptable, if it makes sense, if our process makes sense, then you would adopt or accept the report or the wage ranges. That could be an initial thing. And then you could go from there. You're going to have to make decisions on individual employees. You know, if you make the wage range adjustments, and now you know where people are situated, if you want to make those, how much individual adjustments to make will be dependent on employee performance, you know, that you're closer to, on budget opportunities, which you're closer to. Those are all things that you can't really maybe know right now. The thing that you can know and bring to the board is that this new adjusted wage range based on our study. I guess that's what I would envision you would bring to the board for their approval. And then our full report is going to have all the, I mean, if you don't need that right now, you could wait until we can gather all the information as well, and put that all together, but I'm not sure I can get that done before your September, the entire report done before your September meeting.
The only other thing maybe in principle would be the steps. Potentially implementing a step system between minimum and midpoint, or minimum and market rate.
As a new compensation tool, or just for this particular?
Well, I think if we're gonna, I would think if we're gonna employ that or implement that, it would be throughout the whole pay plan.
And how would the step system work?
Well, he was explaining that it's a tool to kind of keep in front of you how you want to move new employees to midpoint in some, I guess, prescribed timetable perhaps.
Wouldn't you do it based on performance management system?
Well, I think, yeah, it would be assuming that they're making satisfactory progress. I think, again, as David pointed out, if we go back historically through this creation of these pay plans, there was at one time a proposal that there be steps. In fact, there were, I think, a proposal to go all the way up to the maximum in a pay plan, but the piece from midpoint to maximum was removed at one time, and then entirely, we just made it a mid, max, or mid control point maximum as we see it right now. I think we're comfortable with using that. But I don't know if we may want to say in our pay plan, or I should say in the handbook, that we want to move people within that minimum to midpoint within a, we would expect them to move through that within a 3 to 5 year period, I think is what you mentioned as a rule of thumb.
Yeah, generally.
So just as an example, of a way to do it too, is we have a compensation plan that we have 3 different levels. Lowest level is going to be the market adjustment. And that's for people who aren't making satisfactory process. And the next one is like, you know, meeting expectations, you can move a little bit more. And then you could kind of have an exceeds expectations. But there's a big burden of proof on proving where people fall in that. And it all comes down to measurements and rubrics and a formalized performance management. And that's how we move through the system and we reach our, you know, 100%, 120%. No one starts out at 100% usually when they come into the job, but then you move through it using a formalized performance management system and how you score on that based on the rubric and the expectations and the person's goals that they have set is how their compensation is determined on how they move through that system. I would say that's more valuable than a steps system. I say performance management and measurements and consistency on how managers do performance management, because if you don't have that, you really open yourself up for a lot of liability.
We've been talking about this since I've been on this committee, that same philosophy of performance management versus that CPI, that market adjustment. You have both, but having a defined percentage based off of your score is very valuable, and it justifies performance rather than, well, this person deserves this amount because they worked on this project.
And then you have the backup documentation for why decisions were made. There's no question.
Or that if they're not progressing towards the midpoint quick enough, you've got a performance-based merit system that backs up the reason why they're not there, because their performance might be low.
Also, there's an opportunity to talk to them about how to increase their performance I mean, we have to check in with our people throughout the year, because if they're not making progress, we need to let them know. We can't wait till performance and say, oh, you didn't meet this or yet. We have to check in throughout the year. It's set up into our system.
Okay, so the committee would not recommend a STEP system, just
No, I recommend performance management structure with opportunities for people to get some merit adjustments based on performance management. That's what I would recommend.
And I, a 1 to 3 scale is difficult to manage. I would recommend like a 1 to 5 scoring system. I don't,
which is what we're
So we
using.
1 to 5.
1 to 5, okay, that's good, because that then you'll be able to differentiate your lower performers from your outstanding performers. You know, getting that 5 is your stretch goal, and they get a higher percentage, so they're gonna move quicker.
We're pretty detailed on how you achieve those in our system. Like, there has to be some different expectations tied to each of those to achieve those levels. Very detailed, I mean.
And it's meaningful, that way you're not giving, in a STEP system, you're giving a low performer the same pay increase as your high performer, and that can be very disengaging to an employee.
Absolutely.
I think, I don't know if I can talk. I think one of the hard parts is, you know, the whatever 10 positions or whatever that were looked at, they're all positions of 1. We don't have, you know, 5 people doing that job. You know, we have 1 utility superintendent, 1. So yeah, I guess I was lose my train of thought there. So it's not like there's competition necessarily of, well, you know, we have that more so with our operations staff. You know, we've got 8 guys on the street crew, and that's where we do have that more of that tiered approach of, you have to be able to do this before you move up to the next step. So I know that. So I think we have it there. And sometimes it's the, you know, you create the expectations for these other positions, and then the DNR or somebody creates a new rule halfway through the year and you completely flip your job. So I guess we find that sometimes where the goal that you had on January 1 changes on April 1st because of something that just occurred. And we try to redo that, you know, and say, okay, now this is our new focus.
And that's why we have quarterly check-ins.
Yeah. So I guess that's the hard part. So sometimes it's just readjusting where that is and being able to say, yeah, I accomplished my goals, because sometimes you're in a start-stop pattern.
Sometimes when you're looking at leadership position, there's going to be some subjectivity to it.
Yeah.
They're paid as leaders to be subjected to judge their performance. I mean, some of it is not gonna be always measurable.
Mhm.
There's just some of that in there, and you can't get around that.
Sure, okay.
But there are measurements you can, I mean,
Absolutely.
I mean, you can definitely, you can measure everything.
I guess one thing to add from my perspective, the step system here from minimum to market is not meant to be an automatic step, like you get a step. It's based on merit, as you said, as you stated. So that you don't get a step. The step is based on exceeding expectations, for example. So that it's tied to your performance evaluation system. It's not an automatic step. I guess it's only the reason I like it is because it's in there. It's signaling to your employees who you might be hiring at a lower range that, okay, we're committed to get you to this market point, you know, soon. And that we're gonna, if you perform and you get exceeds expectations, you're gonna get 1 or 2 steps. However it's set up, again, you have it has to be tied to your performance evaluation system. So I just wanted to make that clear. It's not meant to be a seniority system where everybody's kind of, you know, okay, 1 year you get a step, 1 year you get a step. That's not necessarily the case if they're not performing well.
And our board at my institution, our board of directors sets what those increases are going to be based on, you know, minimum, mid-range, maximum. They have a big conversation about it. They set those, and that's how we move through our system. Like, we don't know that, we don't look at this and go, okay, this is my first year, my second year, and then at maximum after 3 years, or anything like that. So that should never be understood that way, but yeah, so like I think our last adjustments where we had percentage adjustments, I think we were 5% for those that were top performers. And then I think we were at 3.5% for, and then I think 1.75, I think was what was set for our lowest performers. And so that motivates people to move, you know, because if you want to max out on that highest performing level, you're going to be motivated to get to exceed expectations. It is a very motivating. Everybody wants to work hard to exceed those expectations because they want that additional adjustment and move into the, you know, market rates and the maximum faster.
Right. So for example, you could have tied to exceeds expectations. If you're hired at say 90%, maybe exceeds expectations is 2 steps. So I know if I'm exceeding expectations, I got 2 steps towards market, you know, or if I'm exceeds expectations the next year, I know I can get 2 steps. I'm that closer to market. So you have people after 3 years performing, you know, a job up to your expectations, and they've moved to that market rate quickly. So it can be tied. I'm just saying it's fine with me if you eliminate the steps prior to that. I'm just saying it can be tied together as well.
Yes, then it's just 1 increase for us. We don't do like the, what you call them, steps and lanes. Would be adjustment, you know, CPI or adjustment, and then also merit. It's all just tied into 1. everybody gets a cost of living increase. And then the higher performance get additional. That's how we do it. It's just one percentage. And you don't have this and that. It's just one based off of performance management system. It works well. And it's not the only institution I've been at that does it that way. My previous one did it that way as well, because it's very uniform, kind of prevents a lot of questions on things. People understand it a lot better. How do I achieve, you know, because they're very clear on how they move through the system then. It's not confusing. And it's a little less subjective than other ways.
And I agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying that your performance evaluation tools in the village then need to reflect that.
Mhm.
And so that people are clear and are moving clearly. And if they are, then things should work fine. I do want to emphasize though, that once you adopt this, it's important for not to just to give increases to people, but to move the entire pay grid based on inflation so that you're keeping up with your wages are keeping up with your peer communities and with other jobs that are performing similarly.
So at our last meetings of the board and the finance committee, there was a question that the finance director put out to the two bodies, if you will. What terminology they want to use for what we would use as our base adjustment, if you will, or well, terminology that I guess long and short of it, the terminology they came up with is that they wanted to call it a market adjustment plus merit. Those were the two terms they wanted to use in terms of what components there would be of compensation adjustments. So I suppose chapter 5 then should reflect that, unless this committee disagrees with that, wants to recommend something different.
I think that's what we've talked about for the last couple of years I've been on, is doing the market adjustment, making sure that the pay is keeping up with the ranges of the market, plus the merit increase, because then you
Okay.
have a true performance-based pay system. And adjusting based on the market. So I think those are great terms.
Okay,
Continue to use.
just want to make sure everybody was aware of that. We don't come away with some different understanding that we confuse everybody with again.
I do think the step system, while I understand it completely now, thank you. I think it'll be difficult to update every year with that midpoint, and they're always chasing that midpoint, or it's the midpoint's lower and they were expecting more of an increase, where it could potentially, you could potentially give more than a 5% range or less, if that midpoint doesn't move in the market. The wages might not. I mean, it could go both ways with it. I just feel like that for an organization of 30, it's a very complex pay system, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just, that makes it very complex. And I know I've had feedback from other members saying, I don't understand this, because it is such a complex for a size of 30. I know it's very common in practice, but it's more complex, I think. If you have someone that is able to manage it, I think that's great. But it could be a difficult process.
I think, just if I may, there's probably your finance director, I would imagine, or your administrator would be able to handle the adjustment. You know, say if you're, and actually I was looking at your policy like 5.08, it's kind of like right on with what you were saying. The village is committed to providing a salary range structure that is responsive to the external market and is internally equitable. Data will be collected and analyzed on a regular basis to determine market movement of jobs and current salary trends. So you're committed to the market and typically, then this structure, for example, if you're managing that Appendix E, it just shifts. Well, I was recommending a shift on an annual basis to keep it in line with the market. So the shift in the market is based on inflation, basically, is what most communities do. So for example, if you and budget, if you can pay, say, a 1.5% inflation, then the entire payment grid just shifts 1.5%, and everything stays the same. Everything just shifts 1.5%. And then you're keeping it on an annual basis, you're keeping the wages comparable. And that's how I think you keep it, the wage generally market based. Then on an individual basis, you look and see how are people performing within that range, and then you may adjust for merit. But the entire grid shifts like each annually based on what you're able to increase for inflation.
So looking at that, I understand that part. You're looking at more of an inflation. However, there are some jobs that will move a lot more than a 1.5% in the market. Those jobs that are difficult to recruit for become more marketable. You know, that shift might occur. It might have even a larger increase.
Well, I think what you did do, you asked us to come back to you with a wage range for these different positions, and maybe it's the first time you've looked at it in 5 years or so. I don't know, which is typical. And then now you found that there are some positions that you're behind on. So, I mean, at least from our data, so that you may want to think about adjusting your current personnel, which are experienced, to get them closer to market based on our data. And what should happen as you do this on an annual basis, you should stay pretty close to what your peer communities are paying then for these positions. If you don't shift them, if you don't shift for inflation over time, you tend to fall way behind in what you're paying. And it's also very difficult without kind of doing some kind of wage survey to figure out how much should our positions be increased.
So the next section 5.09 says that a prepared key matrix presented to the HR committee for the determination whether or not to implement, to present or modify, and then it shall forward its decision to finance committee. So I'm assuming I don't think we're not ready to do anything action on this.
Well,
We're not ready to make recommendations.
don't know well, we have PAA's recommendations on what to add, I guess, how to move the upper part of our pay matrix. I guess it's not you do have the whole thing in front of you, but I guess it's a question of what we do with those positions that are right there in that borderline K and L, where there's some bit of overlap there. So I guess that would be something maybe to follow up with Dave on. Those are probably the only implementing the matrix is one thing, and then how we move people there that's the next question that comes to us. So
no action from this committee.
well, are you?
If you follow through on that policy, which I think is again very good, and number 4, And number 5 reflects, like 5, for example, the village will gather, analyze, and the administrator shall recommend changes to the salary structure based on market data and salary trend information. Final approval of these recommendations will be made by the Board of Trustees. A full review of market data for all village jobs will be conducted approximately once every 5 years, which I imagine this is what we did. The administrator will review market data, develop a comparison of market data to current midpoints and current pay practices. So I think that's probably where you are at right now, is we've given you this data and our recommendations. So and then it would go to the Board of Trustees to see if they agree, I guess. Or are they willing to adopt these wage ranges as new wage ranges for your employees. It's not necessarily saying we're going to do anything with the individual employee wages, but just the position's wage rate range.
I think it's quite a bit to digest, to go through, take a look at it.
Well, in terms of the pay plan, again, if you go back to the suggested pay plan revisions, right in here is where there's some overlap. I guess my suggestion there would be if the recommendation is to move the deputy finance director down to K, I would suggest we just remain with the range in K that we have right now. So I don't know, Dave, so we're talking about a difference of 44 cents, I guess, between midpoint of our grade K and the one that you came up with for the grade K. The positions that you reviewed.
Yeah, so that definitely could all be K. I didn't even look below, at that next level, the fleet.
I understand, I'm just trying to maybe simplify this a little bit. So
Yeah.
that, I think our grade L would probably remain as it is. That's at a rate of 35.96. You came up with a midpoint for the clerk position of 37.86. That's about $2 more. So perhaps we just create a grade L1 as I put up here. That would then cover that position based on the data that you reviewed, and the rest then above that are all following the recommendations that you made for grade NMO, whatever.
So you're recommending to move the deputy director of finance from an L down to the K1?
Well, that's what he recommended. I'm not saying that we could still. I think if we talk with talking with Jessica, she did not agree with making that change because she feels that position should be being groomed to become finance director. Now, I know the current individual may not be in the, that position yet, in that capability level, but that's all things, I guess, to work through as time goes by. We wouldn't expect her to be at midpoint right now, anyway.
But it just said in here that if that person received just a few additional responsibilities, then they would be comfortable with an L.
Oh,
In the report, if you read
So
that, he said, so I think that if Jessica looked and said, okay, I can provide this experience for this deputy director, they can take on these additional responsibilities, then PA said they were comfortable with the L.
there would also be an ability to do an appeal or to go through an appeal and look at reclassification, even though we may recommend what he proposes right now too. So I guess
I think I agree with that. I mean, if we that was kind of a gray area, you know, in our analysis. It was just, maybe it was based on just, if the job description, we didn't really feel reflected that, I guess we could review that again, that the job description, see if it was really, it didn't seem to fit on the same category as, say, clerk, which we consider to be a very responsible position with statutory responsibilities and, you know, kind of a more intense position, complex position than the deputy director. But if the intention and the job description can somehow reflect that that position is taking on, you know, responsibilities of the finance director, then we could move it to L. It's not that huge of a difference, but
I just have one small question. Instead of having L1s, would we just shift all the letters down? So you make that M, and then M becomes N, and N becomes O? Just so we don't have 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s sometime down the line? Or does that not matter? That's just that.
So there's, yeah, right now between M and N, there's a dollar difference between essentially.
I'm just saying, you just move the
So-
letter down. Yeah.
I understand. I'm just.
yeah, and again, maybe it's the these are things that you guys can play with in terms of the grade. We're trying to make this accessible to your current system and fit our definitions. So like he had mentioned, there are ways that, you know, as long as the wage differences were reflected, if we wanted to change the grade so that it was just more easily, as long as the hierarchy was the same, you could play with it a little bit.
So I guess along those lines, I don't know that this is then ready to present to the board.
No, I don't think so.
So. I think that input is certainly helpful and that can be. Okay, to this committee next time.
Is this something we'd have to have closed meeting on if we're gonna be going through all this?
Not in terms of the pay
No.
plan per
No.
se, I think. Although, as Michael says, since we're departments of one, essentially, in a lot of cases that people connect the dots.
Easy to connect.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just looking at the data and saying this position should be here.
Right.
You're not saying Michael should be this,
Right.
Jennifer should be this.
I think when we get to the conversation here,
Yeah.
that should be private. When we get to this conversation, this just adopting a pay plan, that can be public. Talking about making movements and people's salary, that's private.
Until Gannett gets the info fine here.
Pardon?
Until Gannett asks for the info and then it's.
Okay. So I don't know, do we have anything more for Dave?
I guess when is your, or what is it that you would need from me, I guess, to help with some kind of decision or?
So would you like myself and some of the department directors to work with Dave on massaging this matrix in that M K through M grades and just come up with
Based on the recommendations.
what should that look like? And then
Bring it back to us.
that would be less,
Nice clean draft for us.
confusing. Okay,
That's what we do with this.
Mhm.
I do like how Dave presented the changes where they had it crossed off, they had the comments in red, so it's easy to see what those changes were and review.
Easy to follow.
Yeah, very easy to follow. Thank you.
I think Keith did that.
I did
Thank
that.
you, Keith.
Yeah, that was Keith, yeah.
Well, it helped a lot. It was a lot easier to follow. So
Okay.
thank you, Keith.
I think I did make a mistake there though with the AP payroll HR coordinator. That is in grade K right now. And it didn't take it out of there. But it's another position that we should maybe do a little additional discussion about as well. So, okay. Thanks, Dave. I don't know if we have anything more unless you prefer to stay on for a while. I'm not sure how much longer we're gonna go here.
Unless I can be helpful somehow.
Well, thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay, and now I guess I'll give Keith a call and then try to, help with in whatever way I can to make the information more understandable, I guess.
Appreciate it. All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
For the board meeting, right?
Doesn't sound like it, no.
Just so he's aware, I don't mention a couple times.
Oh. Yeah, I guess based on that, Dave, we won't be expecting a final report then until after we talk again. And it comes back to the committee in October. And forward to the board after that, I guess.
I guess at least you have our data for wages, should you want to make, some looking forward for your budget purposes or whatever, you can start understanding, what our perspective is from the study.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
All right, seeing as the next item is review focus on employee handbook content, job classifications and compensation. My understanding, here to work with directors based on this information that come back. Advisement for us.
Yeah, and I guess this was included mainly because of Dave's comments about making sure this is consistent and, there are, I think I mentioned last time, it'd be nice, I guess, to go through the whole handbook maybe, but I don't think we want to sit here and do that one night. Any night for that matter. Right, unless that's really something you aspire to do. I think that's a task to be probably handled also by my successor. And anyway, the references to employee resource manager are throughout this handbook, and I don't know that we need to retain those. Probably should just refer to the administrator or designee. I think that term is used elsewhere. Dave was talking about removing some of these hard deadlines that we talk about in here because a reclassification request can really come anytime, right? And some of those things. And I guess beyond that, I don't know that there's really a lot to change here. Does refer to consumer price index. I'm looking at that as a kind of a benchmark or whatever in terms of looking at compensation adjustments. It does talk about control point and market rate, defines control point as the market rate and then vice versa. So I don't know if we want to, there's things of consistency that are kind of minor maybe, but I know not being consistent kind of confuses things that as you go through other discussions. So I guess this along with some other chapters we could certainly look at. I know like chapter 3 talks about records management. I think that's a place where the attorney needs to weigh in. So
Just have to identify 5.08, that salary range structure. Where it has that step. Or that 87.5 and less than 110. So we brought that up report, I know we talked about it. That's top performers.
Oh, sure, yeah.
and that, like, do you really want to be saying that in the handbook?
Well, does this get into the whole? I think we had that comment another time, was if this is defining policy versus what were the two terms? Policy versus
Guidance.
Procedures, we usually call them policies and procedures.
So I guess that's the part where,
I guess, I don't know.
you know, as you're evaluating employees, I think it helps the communication maybe with the board too, as far as, you know, this employee, my recommendation is to put them at the market rate because of X, Y, Z. I guess it kind of gives a definition of what a market employee is. If we don't have that, I guess sometimes it's ambiguous, you know, what I think maybe in a market employee is different than what somebody else maybe is. I don't know. I guess for me, it helps at least give some kind of definition for an employee even to know, okay, this is what I have to do to meet market. Yes, the study, you know, after the wages came out, you know, if you look at the second side or whatever, you know, and the exhibit E, it showed some people weren't there yet. But if you looked at the existing, everybody was. So, I mean, I guess sometimes some of it's just the realistic nature too of understanding, hey, we waited 5 years, we now did our full study. Maybe we don't have the finances to make everybody a market employee on day one, but the goal is to still get them there.
I don't know that this is where this belongs.
Sure.
I don't know that that would be, I've never seen something like this in a handbook, so I think it's a good procedure and it's good for managers to kind of go, okay, how do I make these? Because it's in our performance management, this is how we make our decisions, but I wouldn't put that in a public handbook. That's just my recommendation, I wouldn't even bother having it in there.
So if you have a true merit-based pay system, you're rewarding the employees for their performance versus getting them to a market.
Yeah, but that even says it, they're continuing to learn the job while meeting performance standards. Then that's also at a spot where they're fully trained, but they're at a level that's less than proficient. So if somebody's like, hey, I've been here 5 years, how come I'm not at market? You're less than proficient at your task, so you're not there yet. It works both ways.
You also have to say, how do you measure that?
Yeah, well, that's where you say, you know,
So they might say, I am proficient, and you say, you're not proficient, how do you measure that? How do you
Yeah.
provide the evidence?
To say
Because
that.
I'm guessing most people are gonna say, I'm proficient at my
Yeah.
job.
I'll say, well, you haven't gotten your CDL yet, you need it to be
But
proficient.
that's, you have a very.
Yeah, I have
hard-
that.
Yeah, but what about for people with soft skills, not hard skills? It's
Yeah.
much more difficult to measure that if you're not using a uniform system.
But then how do you measure that for anything in their job? If it's not,
What it looks like to get a 5.
yeah,
If we're evaluating behavior standards, you have a 5 as, I don't know what your words say, but kind of is like the outstanding, they're always coming to work with a positive attitude, never gets involved with gossip. You know,
Time
you
in and
can
then-
time, there's so many different things that you can put in as examples. And then
Sure.
as you as managers are evaluating your staff on those soft skills, you're like, okay, does this employee always come to work that way? No.
Yeah.
And it drops them down to that 4, right? Is it, there's some subjectivity again on
Yeah.
some of those, but you have to start somewhere. And at least then you have it documented.
Mhm. And we provide examples why we think they, you know, when I'm like, this person exceeded expectations, here's an example of why they exceeded these expectations. Here, and I write down narrative based on this person went above and beyond at this time when I needed them to. They stayed up late, you know, so those are the kind of things. But then you also have on the opposite side, this person often comes in late. I can't find them at different points in the day because when I need, you know, their assistance and I don't know where they are, you know, they're not checking in, you know.
and we do that, I guess.
You do it quarterly?
Quarterly, no.
Yeah, we just.
No, I'm just
Yeah.
wondering what the review process is.
Yeah, I check in with my staff quarterly to say, hey, you're doing good, this is great. Or I check in with quarterly saying, hey, I've kind of noticed some things slipping, how do we get back on track? So that's, we do have a quarterly check-in. I don't measure them, but I do check in and say, things are going good. Here's what you can do to take things to the next level, or here's some things that just seem to, you need a little bit more training on.
Yeah, I guess I informally do that almost weekly.
That's a good practice. I mean,
But,
we do it once
but the documentation
Yeah,
of that
informally.
year end
Correct.
So it's-
becomes very important,
Yep.
because if you are having those discussions, or if it's,
be documented.
yeah, and you're not documented, it's hard at the end of the year, when Jessica's doing budget, and you're saying, yeah, I wish I would have wrote that stuff down, it's too late. And
And that's part of that quarterly process, is to kind of go, okay, I've checked in, here's some things that have happened in this quarter, because 3 months is a lot better than 12 months trying to remember, well, how do I know that? How do I measure
Mine
that?
is a banking background, so it's
Yeah,
easy to measure loan production, it's
Yeah.
easy to measure delinquency, new loans, SBH
Yeah.
revenue, all these things that are part of the lenders stuff.
And do employees evaluate themselves?
They do, yeah,
So they do a formal process where they fill out and they score themselves?
correct,
Okay, and then that is also matched up with.
with the supervisor.
Mhm.
Okay,
You can be here then.
covers the. No, that's, if we're moving on to the next item, yeah, I have officially announced that I will be retiring at the end of the month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm not sure how to feel about it.
Way to go,
I have
Liz.
mixed feelings, I guess. I think I probably said that in my. Oh, I said that in my letter to the board, I guess. It's a whole different world ahead of me, I guess, but I do have some grandsons close by, and as I say, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. They're so close, and I see them often, and I want to see them as often as I can. So anyway,
One of my long-term colleagues that worked in 2 different places with her, she retired recently. And then she came to visit just a couple weeks ago, and I was like, she looked younger than she's ever looked. Like, I'm like, Deb, you look amazing, you look so young, and she had her hair dyed, she looked her skin was, I'm like, retirement
Retirement works
looked
well.
good on her, but she stayed busy and she's having a great time, and I've worked with her for 16 years, and she's the youngest that I've ever seen her look.
There you go, Keith.
So that's what you got to look forward to.
Retirement.
They have a hard time picturing you at a spa.
no spa. I'll be out in the woods cutting firewood or making maple syrup or something like that.
Well, if you're not gonna be here for the next meeting, we can present that.
Well, we have some capable department directors that can handle that.
I will be absent for the next meeting.
All right,
Oh, I will be.
2nd of October, I thought.
Wait, I gotta see, maybe I will be here. I'm trying to figure out when my flight goes out. Let me see if it's the 2nd or the 3rd.
Did you catch that, Sarah? I will not.
I didn't.
That would be the second, right?
Not that I would
Oh, I
be
think
here,
I
but
should be okay, I'll
does
be
a
here
different
Monday.
date for that meeting work
I
better?
will.
to Have continuity between everybody that's here tonight or not?
I don't think. We just asked it, would it be better a different day that week?
No, I'm flying out on Tuesday, so Monday's great for me.
Okay.
I can make it Monday, but
Oh, okay.
I'm flying out Tuesday.
You're looking at different days, Ellen.
No,
He was just asking you.
I was only throwing out the idea that if you want to consider a different day for continuity of
Oh,
the item, but
So you're not gonna be here
as long as you got-
this- I'll be gone the rest of the week, then
you'll have 3 of the 4 anyway,
Second,
right?
I can be here the
Did you say that?
2nd, I can't be here after the
Oh.
2nd.
okay.
It should be here. Are we going at the end of the week, probably, up to.
Jamie, are you still on?
She's there.
No. Best that you stay with the appointed date, probably.
15, or do you want? 5 is okay.
Staff?
No, we'll see you in a month. I'll see you next week and the following week, yeah.
You seem everything. All right, just looking for. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? Favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Adjourn.